You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries. This is a podcast about Shadow Dark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about the recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss how to make a deal. Well, hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody.
Hey, I gotta tell you, man. You didn't ask, but I'm gonna tell you anyway. I'm kind of in a highs and lows right now. Like, definitely having some Gary Con missed out. I don't know if you saw the pictures this past weekend.
Boy, howdy, is there some FOMO there, my friend?
Yeah, someday.
All right, well.
On the upside, my goodness, it was good to get back at the table and have something to talk about here. Dice were rolled, heads will roll. It was good times.
Indeed it was, Jody. We got two meaty sessions just this past weekend. And you, sir, had something you wanted to bring to the program. So, Jody, why don't you take us to the table?
I would be honored. As you may know, I've been running Keep on the Borderlands, so we set our scene in the Caves of Chaos, and my intrepid trio of adventurers, following clues, decide, hey, that Minotaur cave, let's go check that out. Now, they didn't know what was up there. Stony outcropping, mysterious, as one of my players called it, the Mason-Dixon line of the Caves of Chaos Valley. I'd laid some found work and rumors. Anyway, they get into the cave. They navigate the disorienting spell. I did use the dungeon craft suggestion of make it cave fungus, not just a spell. So they navigated that. They got their bearings, and they found their way to the Minotaur's lair. Now, using our crawling clock, I had set up that the Minotaur was clearly out there, or there was something big and lurking in the dark, and it was bellowing and it was echoing around. So they knew this thing was closing in on them. They also knew they had found its lair, but it was not there. Now, the lair, as I described it, is kind of a rough-hewn, open chamber, and along the wall were tall kind of pedestals of stone, if you will, chopped off stalagmites with large piles of bone and skull atop each of them on the back wall of the cave. Also a strange kind of rocky outcropping that they dealt with later and got lots of loots. Now, they set their trap. They knew there was one of two possible entrances. They set a trip line using their pythons, iron spikes, and made a bunch of noise to lure the thing in and braced for impact. The Minotaur came in, didn't disappoint, did some real serious damage, but things started getting away from the Minotaur a little bit, so it lowered its head and charged the Elven Ranger off in the corner, pinning him to the wall and 1 hit point short of dropping him. So now the party's separated. Minotaur's pinned the ranger in the corner. The fighter and priest are on the opposite side of the room. And the fighter says to me, hey, I know I can get there, but I'm real close to one of those piles of stone and skull. Is there a way I could run to that and then kind of jump off that for big double-handed axe, broadsword swing, really just clobber this thing? I said, yeah, it's right at the edge of your movement, using the kind of 6 squares versus near. I was like, tell you what, if you want to make the test, I'm going to give you a dex check. If you fail the dex check, you're going to roll your attack at disadvantage. But if you pass that check, you'll roll your damage with advantage. He pondered for not but a heartbeat and said, I'm making that roll. And make the roll he did, passing the dex check, his character launching high in the air, double-handed sword held high, came down, and rolled pretty lights out on damage, and severed the head of the Minotaur, ending the fight, and making them rife with loots and ill-gotten gain, a heroic event by a heroic fighter.
Oh yeah, Jody, this is why we play role-playing games. And right from the get-go, as we gather round the fire here for a little discussion, look, making deals with players, I think, is something that both you and I really enjoy. But I wanted to kind of start this conversation off with just a big overarching question, which is, when do you decide, or how do you decide when you're going to make a deal or when you're just going to say yes, right? This is more of a yes, but.
Yeah, this is a great question and really highlights the strength, for me, of Shadowdark. The thing is, if I were playing Dungeon Crawl Classics, or I was playing 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons or modern iteration thereof, I would be really hesitant to make this call because there are feats and abilities and skills that are for this kind of thing. Shadowdark does not have those. However, as you asked, you're also supposed to just say yes. Well, I do use miniatures on a grid. Loosely. I don't cleave too closely to that this many squares exactly. And so it creates liminal spaces in the rules. And there's a lot of Shadowdark that is like, hey, make a call, figure it out. How's this going to work? And you want to encourage that sort of thing with your player. But what I've learned over the years, and this is the kind of more direct answer to your question, is the way I lean is I never want to say, yeah, go for it, if the yeah, go for it is going to set a precedent that would then become a default state. So can I run over there, jump off that pillar, and do double damage? Yes. Well, then every fight forever, that fighter is going to look for some excuse to jump off of a thing because then he knows he gets to do double damage. And if I say no later, they're like, well, it worked that other time. How come it doesn't work now? And that's not a fun conversation, because that's not a conversation about minotaurs and skulls and pedestals and giant two-handed swords flying through the air, which is a cool thing to do. So with all that said, the short version is, why not just say yes, is because I don't want to set a precedent, but I do want to encourage my player to do the fun thing. And thankfully now I've played enough Shadowdark that I knew that interaction was the right trade-off. Harder to hit, very likely to miss with a disadvantaged roll, but advantage damage, that's pretty spicy when you're swinging a big old two-handed claymore.
That's very true. And I don't know. I tend to agree with you. I think, rulings that set a precedent are important. And it's one of the great things about Shadowdark is those fruitful voids that allow us to make decisions about how we're going to rule X, Y, and Z. But one of the things I've found about when, making deals with players is I have found that there's kind of a dichotomy. There are players who will always push to get the best possible result, right? And they will always kind of argue for whatever the best and easiest circumstances are. And then there are the players who are worried that they are going to push too far, and they will not do that. They will actually actively wonder, maybe even out loud, if you're being too generous. And for me, I don't know how to sometimes deal with that. So, you make the decision. I think I'm on the same page here about let's not set a precedent. Let's throw a roll at it in this circumstance. But I also sometimes I just want to reward the player for getting out of their comfort zone at all, especially when they're new and asking these kinds of things. And I don't know, where are you on that? Because that's something that this gets into learning. It gets into anywhere where there's collaboration between the GM and the player. I have found that players will sometimes try and push you towards the most ideal circumstance. And also I have found that there's a large number of players that worry that they're getting one over on me.
Or that they're going to break the world somehow.
Yeah.
That if I ask to do this in a strange way, I think you see the break the world happening more so with spellcasters. Of, hey,
Sure.
Can I use this spell in this goofy way? Well, I don't know. Let's think about that. And that's why so often I default to, let's add a roll to the equation. Let's add a beat for this extra thing. the other thing is by saying yes and adding those beats of, I'm going to make you roll for it. I'm going to give you a chance to like, yes, you can do the thing, but I'm a big fan of yes, but not a big fan of yes, and I'm here for yes, buts. I like yes, buts, and I cannot lie. Feels like a t-shirt. So the reason I'm a fan of that is it's a good volley. It creates that back and forth, and it shows the rest of the table that that's okay. And it becomes predictable that that's going to be handled. You know, I think the danger for me in this, even more than the setting the bad precedent in the rules, is one, slowing down the game. That's a big like if this starts going into an ongoing negotiation, that always feels
because then you're talking about rules and you're not talking about to a certain degree. Yeah.
But the bigger one is the player who pushes, like you were talking about, having to just be willing to say no, because once you open that door, you have to find a yes but. So the nice thing about yes but and not yes and in these instances is there's already a leaning on the GM's part to say, yeah, I think you can do that, but you're going to need to do X, Y, or Z. Or, yeah, I think you can do that, but here's going to be the consequence. You're at disadvantage next round or something. There's a lot. The other problem I have with this, and I feel like you throw caution to the wind in a way I wish I could, is I worry that I'm making a call mechanically that's out of alignment with the game. And with Shadow Dark's flat math, that's doable. You can make a call pretty quickly in one of these negotiations that you're like, oh, that's actually bananas. That's so good. Had I said disadvantage or advantage to hit, the advantage to hit in this case would have been, I genuinely like, no, that would have been a bad call, because the trade-off on damage there just went through the roof on the likelihood of dealing damage. So yeah, that flat math piece, I kind of talked around your very reasonable question, but it's not always just yes, let's make a deal. Let's bring another example into this, shall we? Because you said at your table you had some of this as well.
Yeah.
So let's make the pot more rich.
Okay, so I will get to that in a moment. What I want to do was go back to the flat math bit that you bring up, because look, I think I'm of two minds here. Number one, it's really easy to, if you're not careful or you don't understand the kind of the math behind Shadow Dark, sure. I have gone on record many times in sessions or whatever. I run games mostly on vibes. This gets me into trouble sometimes because I don't really care about the math very much, unless it is a persistent modifier or a persistent effect. That is where I tend, like if it's a magic item, I have given magic items that have completely and utterly changed the complexion of characters, especially spellcasters, and have made spellcasting way too easy because I didn't fundamentally think through a particular magic item's bonus to spellcasting. And there's really only been one of these instances, but that aside, in these moments, right, I honestly don't think about the math very much. And so I'm of two minds, right? I think it's good to kind of understand the flat math. And then there's the other time where it's like, dude, it's hard to get players to engage with the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just going to throw something out there and we're going to go with it. I do think we can come back to this idea about like rulings and persistence of rulings and whether or not players should or shouldn't assume that if the same thing happens in the future, like that's something else. But I will answer your question about what happened in my game. So I'm running the Barrow Maze. We were in the Barrow Maze on Sunday, and this isn't exactly a how to make a deal. What it was a back and forth between a player and a use of a D6 decider. So I'll set this up as quickly as I possibly can because it has a few moving pieces. Basically, the players had found a key, and the key was on a dead adventure in another room. They had also found with that key a map of the general dungeon area and had done an exceptional job of like piecing their map that they had drawn together with this map that they found. It was awesome. They find their way to the room that is on this map that's basically circled and is identified as, this is the room that goes with this key. The key was wrapped in this map. Booyah. They get there. They find out that the key opens a door that has 4 elemental sigils on it. They put the key in the door. They open the door. The elemental sigils kind of like a little...
Price is wrong.
Yeah, like a little what you may have it. A roulette wheel almost, exactly, or a wheel of fortune situation. They get the air elemental. I roll a d4. They get the air elemental, and they open the door. And the long and short of it is that, and they figured this out by the end of the session, that they were going to have to more than likely destroy this elemental, which was going to be one of 4 different elementals, in order to get to this extremely. They don't know what's in there, but they know that there's some kind of compartment in this room that is sealed magically. They tried to figure out a way to not fight this thing because they were very low on hit points and were like really annoyed that they probably weren't going to be able to get whatever is in this compartment. And I kept telling them it must be very powerful.
Well, all the signs point to greed is good right now.
Right.
Justified greed right here.
So end of the session is everything you want, right? Push your luck, all that good stuff. Well, one of our players is a mage, is a wizard, and speaks primordial, and is like, hey, could I talk to this thing? I speak the language of elementals. And I said, yeah, sure. Steps up, is neutral, and had but has like the mark, the dark mark of like an undead god blazoned in his forehead, and steps up, and I say, look, you have this undead god's symbol in your forehead, don't you? And he says, yeah, but I'm wearing a bandana over my head. And I said, okay, but this is an air elemental that is creating an enormous amount of wind. And he said, yeah. Oh, God.
Oh, great moment.
And I said, look, we're going to leave this up to the dice, but I think you and I can both agree here that there is a chance that this thing is going to whip this bandana off your head, and this mark that you have is going to reveal itself, and you're not going to be able to pull the wool over the air elemental's eyes. But long and short of it, I said you need a 5 or a 6 on this D6. We're going to roll it out in front of the table. You have a 1/3 chance of this thing not coming off. I roll in front of the table. I get, everyone's bought into this. We go over and we roll it. It's a 4. It flies off. And the rest is
hilarity ensues.
So what I think it dovetails really nicely here is that you made a deal with a player in order to get an advantage. I made a deal with a player to just establish a question that we would answer with a D6, and we would all agree to the answer. Whatever, and so you left it up to a dice roll. And I left it up to a dice roll. And I think that this is what I wanted to kind of get at in this episode. Is I like when we can collaborate with players and create these moments.
Yeah, 100%. That it's a nebulous space in the rules, or maybe more precisely, it's a nebulous space in the world. That the world itself is not giving a clear, this is what will happen answer. Had you simply said, the air elementals gusting gale force winds blow the bandana from your head, and then he's grumpy about your poor choice of forehead tattoo. So that would be unsatisfying because no agency.
Sure.
At the same time, ignoring that that's a reality and that potentially very exciting moment is really rad. That would, or not rad, that would stink to just be like, oh, well. At the same time, ignoring that potentially interesting moment and hand waving it and ignoring that detail would stink. That it's way cooler to have this gritty moment of the bandana on your head and the wind whipping around. And could you have made another deal of like, could you catch the bandana before it blows off? Sure. But some sort of deal. Why the D6 though? You got a whole lot of polyhedrals plopped in front of you.
Yeah.
Why a D6 on that?
Well, look, I don't want to get too far afield from this idea of making a deal, because I think we have other examples we could bring in here. But the reason I use a D6 is very simple. This was something that I was personally introduced to from Hankrin Fernale, from Runehammer, his just 50-50, throw it to a D6, answer questions. And then it is in the Shadow Dark core rules, the D6 decider, I believe also a 50-50 chance. But this is essentially just a very simplified Oracle die that is very common in solo games. There is an Oracle die in Solo Dark, which is free. You can get it. Link it in the show notes. And I was actually pointed to Solo Dark by Gels, who's one of the boffins of the Discord. He pointed me to Solo Dark as a means of kind of maybe adding a little bit of complexity to the role. But I will say, for me personally, I want a binary result on a D6. The reason that I use a D6, to answer your question directly, is because everyone has rolled a D6 before. We've talked about this. You and I have talked about this so much, just over the course of our time talking about games together, that while we love the D20, I love a D12, people can't necessarily conceptualize, just in terms of their experience. They can't necessarily conceptualize how much different rolling a 2 or higher, or a 5 or higher, or a 12 or higher on a D20. Like, those numbers just kind of are harder. Everyone understands what it means to roll a D6. You don't have to know the math. You just need to know what it's like to roll a D6. And if you say you need a 5 or better, everyone has a heuristic in their head. Again, they might not know at all what the odds actually are mathematically, but everyone can kind of gauge them in their head. And it's a magical die. It's not my favorite, but it is the one everyone's familiar with, and it works for me.
Yeah, it's comedically actually one of the mathematically most cumbersome of all the dice. But if you do the same thing with a D10, it's hilarious how confusing it is, because you're like, you have a 40% chance, because increments of 10. So you can just do 10, 20, 30, 40. And people are like, wait, so do I want to roll and you never have to do that with a D6. It's a 5 and 6. It's a 2 and 6.
You could train your group to do it with a different die, but
why would you?
Well, here's the thing: is for a long time, you and I were playing with new players, and with new players, I always like to figure out what the easiest path from question to answer is in any role-playing setting. Again, I run my games mostly on vibes. I don't really care about the math, and therefore I don't need increments of 10%. I don't need increments of 5% on a D20. I need to know the answer to a question, and I want to roll a die and have a reasonably good heuristic for understanding what that's going to be. And with new players and old old, quote unquote, veteran players, a D6 works just as well. It's just as clear. So in terms of the fact that both you and I have onboarded quite a bit of people in the last couple of years to Shadow Dark and just to RPGs in general, it's just easier to not have to deal with the kind of opaqueness of, for whatever reason, those other dice. Now, I want to get us back to making a deal. And Jody, I'm going to throw this at you. I gave you all a deal on Friday night, this past Friday, in our Dolmenwood game. I made you a big narrative deal. An NPC gave you the option to essentially join the Dolmenwood version of the Men in Black.
That's what's in my notes.
And what I want you to do is I want you to walk me through, because this is an example of this isn't in it's not in combat, and you guys had an opportunity to kind of talk about this. I wanted you to talk about this because I don't really think that the trade-off was weighing heavy on you, but it was interesting that I, as an NPC, the GM through an NPC, was making a deal with the players that would fundamentally change the trajectory of a campaign. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on this. I actually haven't talked to you about this moment at all. So what did you think about that? How I handled it, how I introduced it, and what ultimately the party chose?
Our live on-air game audit session for our own games. It's totally self-indulgent, and I like that I'm not the one doing it for once. It was great. No notes. It was fantastic. What happened, and the reason the Let's Make a Deal NPC that said, hey, I want you to push your chips all in, is because you've done so much work with faction play. We understand what's going on to a degree around the map. We know who the factions are that are in our neighborhood. We know who's bumping up against who. We have some sense of how those factions interact with each other. And our group has been doing this long enough that our adventure party has a little bit of a compass within that. We have the direction we believe to be the correct direction. So when this NPC said, hey, align with me and pick a direction for real, it was great. And as a player, frankly, and this is where player GM gets tough sometimes.
Sure.
Is I'd been wanting that for a while, but that's not my purview as a player to say, group, can we just pick somebody and be buddies and all in? I have had my characters make it overt attempts at doing that at times. Has not played out. And comedically on this one, I don't know really where I landed, and I was really curious to hear how the group played it out. But I think the Let's Make a Deal there of, hey, I'm going to offer you an alliance, says this NPC, which is a very common RPG DMing situation of have an NPC say, I'm going to offer you this alliance, is really powerful when you, like any decision point, I understood the stakes and I understood what was to be gained and what was to be lost. And I think in all of these, even in the simple, humble D6, I know what I can gain and I know what I can lose. And I know what the outcome is. The jumping off the pedestal, chopping the Minotaur's head. I know what I can gain. I know what I can lose. And in this case, it was narrative stakes of I know what I'm gaining and I know what I'm losing. That's how making a deal works. It actually played out really well. And I was actually thrilled for my own little voice of 1 of 6, was delighted that we said yes, that we were like, yeah, we're going to align with this person and set off in our merry woods. Now, I'm going to volley this back to you.
Sure. Not
too long ago now, you were a player who explored the Tower of Xenopus.
Mm-hmm.
And a not so neutral person offered you a deal to, hey, I'd love to hire you to go fetch this item out of this tower for me. And you already had some indication that this person probably shifty. This wizard is up to some stuff that I don't know that I agree with. So the stakes weren't as clear in terms of factions, but there was profit to be made as a low-level character. There was alliance to be had there. And the deal was, you can go about your business, don't worry about it, or you can go do this thing for me. I don't remember it being a threat. It was a offer of a job.
Yeah, I mean, I think we took it as a threat because the guy was so annoying, but...
Smug, damn it.
Yeah. Look, so I think what's great about like the quest giver making a deal, right? Because that's ultimately what these two situations were quest giver NPCs, is that the deals were fairly transparent in terms of specifically what you had to do to accomplish your side of the deal. And I think that like that is true from your example, right? Like, what do you need to do to fulfill your side of the deal, right? Like, do you need to go and capture a person and bring them back, like I told you needed to do in our Dolmenwood game? The party has been tasked with capturing a person and bringing them back, right? Great. When we were going to the Towers of Xenopus, it was go and get this thing and bring it back to me. You can have all the other treasure, right? It was go and get this like crystal ball, right? Great. A fetch quest. Love a fetch quest. Those two things work because when you make the deal, they being the NPC, they just say what the deal is, and there's a little bit of transparency there. I will say, I don't know how you feel about this, that I am not a fan of the, I don't want to say this definitively, but I feel like 9 times out of 10, the let's make a deal and then the deal is broken somehow. almost always ends in bad feelings. It certainly would have ended in bad feelings if you pulled the rug out from underneath this player who's attacking the Minotaur and was like, ha ha, you don't get advantage. Right? Like, I mean, of course. But I think establishing the stakes, and then if it's an NPC, like pulling the rug out, like, oh no, this person was a double agent, or that sort of stuff I have never been able to pull off successfully in a way that I felt was satisfying for the players. It sometimes was a satisfying twist. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Jeez, here we go. How long have we been doing this? What are your thoughts about that twist, or when you make a deal with the players and there's almost like a table-wide compact about a quest?
I think to do that well, because I agree, don't do that. If you're going to do something along those lines, it needs to be a pretty sizable and transparent long con. So it can't be a gotcha, because the players are dealing with imperfect information. Right? That you have perfect information as the GM. You can do whatever you want. The world bends to your whim. The players are taking whatever you tell them about the world as truth. And then if you undercut that by turning those truths into lies, it is breaking part of the foundational agreement of what you've sat down at a role-playing game, not as characters and NPCs, but as human players around the table. You've kind of broken that deal. And I think that's why it falls flat. So how could you get that to work? And I'm thinking of the Xenopus one, that you guys took the coin, you went, okay, the story was his apprentice had absconded with his crystal ball seeing stone, and he wanted you to go get it back, and he told you how to get in and said, hey, you're going to get in, it's dangerous, but find the guy, get the stuff, get it back to me, and you can have whatever you find along the way, and here's some coin. Rad. Okay, deal. We shake on it, lechy, creepy, shifty guy, wizard goes off about his business. You found out that the coin he had given you, he was using to scry on you and keep tabs on you, which he had not told you he would be doing. And that's where the screw job, the twist came in. But he still honored the deal when you came back.
Yeah, totally.
If I was going to have him turn actually evil, it would have had to have been, one, a multi-session arc. Two, you're going to have to go into the tower, find the guy has left. Now you're going to go off to the next town to chase this wizard to get the thing. And as you're doing that, I would be making it obvious that the wizard back home is wildly untrustworthy, and is going to screw you over in some way. And I would probably make it clear how he was going to hose you over, what his agenda was for hosing you over. And at low level, that's great because you're just some peons and he's just using you as pawns.
Sure.
To do something terrible.
It's great for you.
Yeah. But it has to be that, to where the twist of oh man, this guy sucks. We feel so cheated. And now we are going to backtrack for our revenge, where we're gonna have a way out to change the deal again. So the only way I would condone running a tricked you on the information you didn't have that I did is if then that leads to a new deal.
Got it.
And the players have valid, viable, good options to make said new deal.
That's interesting. So I agree with all of that. And for me, it really does have to be, this is kind of a dirty word in the OSR, but it has to be an arc of the campaign, right?
Yeah, this is not a generative truth.
No, and so that might just completely take this off the table for some folks. So without belaboring that point, I want to bring up one final thing that is, I think, a great way to make deals with parties and with players, and that is experience. So one thing that I tried way back when, and I don't know if you remember this, but this was actually in response to a Matt Colville video that I believe is called Towards Better Rewards or something like that. Anyways, he proposed creating individual character goals. And the deal was, and the part of this that makes it a deal, is that if the character accomplished the goal, there would be a commensurate reward. And I tried this, and it was fun. And I don't want to get into too many of the details. It was during a 5th edition game that we played years ago, but with the same group that's currently playing in Dolmenwood. And I moved away from it because it was a little fiddly. But what I wanted to ask you is, somewhere in there I felt like there was something good. Like there was that concrete nature of, you do something and you get something. And the thing that I thought was good was I tied leveling in 5th edition to accomplishing quests and tasks for a little while. And specifically by giving you experience, right? So if you go and do this thing, you'll get more experience. You'll actually, you won't just get experience for the stuff you'd normally get experience for, you get more. And I wanted to ask you, do you think that there is a place for like making deals with players or parties where experience is the carrot? Or is this more, you want to kind of keep it in world? Because all the examples that we've used, whether they're kind of instances of like a 6-second turn in a combat or a 10-second turn or whatever you want to, who knows how long turns are in combat anymore. But regardless, a round in combat, we'll say, or, a quest hook, these are all in-world things, right? Some require dice rolls and some don't. What do you think about attaching experience to them?
So I tried this as well. We both took turns with this with different groups at different times.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Okay.
And I had the same conclusion you did, of it just never fully manifested in the way I wanted it to. If I were to revisit it, I think it would have to be, there's a few have-to-be's that would make this sing. One, if you follow Matt Colville and MCDM, very clear tone and style of game.
Sure.
It is unabashedly, and I hope to his success, this is the kind of game I run and the game system we are building, and it is very bespoke. And that idea of a personal quest to fulfill, a personal agenda, really syncs with that style of game, the cinematic and the dramatic and the action-packed and still tactical. So that would be my first kind of cornerstone, is if I were going to go back and revisit that idea, I would need players who were investing in their own characters enough for me to hand them those reward options. I think also there's a branch in the road here in your question of, are we talking about for individuals? And I think for individuals, if you were running a heroic individualized story arc game where your characters are exploring the world. A minute ago we just talked about the generative game versus the story arc game, and here we're moving it even further into the character centric versus world centric game, which is a whole separate paradigm. For the character centric style of game, I think this can work really well because you can kind of privately say, hey, while you've been playing, you've mentioned X, Y, or Z, that this thing is important to your character. In our Dolmenwood game, we just had an interesting back and forth in the deal we made with our NPC, where our Mossling wizard said, well, I've recently aligned myself with these old god values. I've recently aligned myself kind of in this spiritual direction within the spirit of the woods. I'm happy to join with this NPC, but I need her to know I'm not willing to bend on that. Like that. And it turned out that those goals aligned. So it was great. That very much could be an individualized quest of like, hey, you have just promoted or espoused that you have this value as a character, and we're going to set up a quest around reaching that in some way. So that's one way. Now, the other question is, if you are running in a wide open world game, I don't think those individual character hooks work. That's the style I run, and I think that's where it was discordant with the way I run, because I'm pretty unabashed about it is world first. There is a living, thriving world around you as a character, and you're going to interact with that world, or rather that world is going to interact with you. So you need group quests for that. If I were to return to this sort of thing, as hooks came out, almost like the adventure board, and I mean, if you wanted to in-world this in a very weird way, if you had the classic adventure board up,
sure,
and then here's your quests, like, oh, we're going to take this quest, and then have little XP totals, like video game style, attached to those of like, yeah, if you go save, the goblin's daughter from the evil blacksmith, then you can go and get 2 experience points along with whatever you get along the way. Funny enough, I think the Shadow Dark XP system leans really well into this option.
Yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to get at was I'll never miss an opportunity to kind of plug the Shadow Dark XP system because I overlooked it and I think this is probably the thing that I feel most sheepish about because I'll speak for myself here. I read the XP system and immediately thought, this isn't really what I'm looking for. Let's do gold for XP, blah, blah, blah. But, after 2 years of kind of doing our own thing, seeing the wisdom and value in the way that Kelsey has set up the XP system, especially under sources of XP, gold gems, of course, oaths, secrets, blessing, magic items, meaningful tokens and trophies, and clever thinking. Well, I think that there is an opportunity for if a GM wanted to adding another bullet point there, which is completing quests. You could say that this is gilding the lily a little bit. You're already getting experience for going out and getting the treasure and stuff like that. So maybe it's not for everybody, but I do think that those deals of if you go do this, you will get experience. That's interesting. I'm not necessarily thinking about implementing that into my game, but I think that it could work, especially for a long-term narrative campaign, especially for players who maybe are struggling a little bit with motivation, right? Because, maybe they're coming from a more heroic fantasy game where their motivations and kind of the general vibe of the game is just different. This can be a carrot instead of, just a bunch of sticks, which are basically like everything can kill you and you have, 1 hit point.
Right. Well, again, I got 2 immediate thoughts that I want to bounce off you.
Sure.
See if I can hold them in my head long enough to get them there. First off, one of the core kind of things we've realized about Shadow Dark is the intent is not to have you fighting all the time. You should be interacting with mobs in other interesting ways, skirting around them, stabbing them, not stabbing them, talking to them, making alliances.
Talking to them while stabbing them.
An option, especially
making
if you're a
alliances
thief.
While stabbing them.
Yes, all of these are via bribing them and running away. After chopping off the Minotaur's head, they were swarmed by scourges, they were swarmed by stingbats.
Oof.
Damn it.
A scourge. Some might say a scourge of stingbats.
A scourge of stingbats, indeed. We all know that's the plural. So they took the Minotaur's head and threw it into the swarm to try and get it to see if they'd stick. Hey, isn't that another form of making a deal? But in a game where it's not always about stab the thing and take the loot, then it almost feels like there should be an incentive not to do that, where the incentive around go out and get the treasure does seem to lean awfully heavily towards go stab the critters.
Yeah, I love this. And I think as far as like making a deal is concerned, the thing I like about making deals with players, just in general, whether the reward or the outcome is experience or not, is it gets the players involved in not just the story of the game, but it's a little bit of player GM.
Yeah.
And that empowering of the player, I suppose this is kind of maybe a little bit of the kind of point of this whole thing. But like I like empowering players, but I like doing it in ways where they feel like they're not given such a huge decision space, right? Combat tends to kind of focus everything into like usually a room or two, and the thing I like about making deals in terms of quests or things like that is that it focuses the game so that players, they can feel a little bit lost when you're kind of, like you were saying, you just wanted a quest.
Yeah.
Because, the party in our Dolmenwood game had been kind of just ping-ponging around and kind of, doing some downtime and kind of ambling around.
Finding new bridges to burn at all corners.
At all, like any good party does. But I think you are unique in kind of always wanting a quest, whereas, I think hex crawls in general are pretty good for just, I want to walk out the door and I want to walk over there and then I want to go see what's over there. And that's what we were doing for a little while. I was like, let's just go and see what's going on over here. And then eventually the quest will kind of reveal itself, or we'll choose a direction. But yeah, I think when it comes to making deals, the empowering of players, that's what I come back to all the time. That's the juice.
And I think that's why we ended up talking about XP in a kind of weird way, is so I want to empower my characters and give them that moment to grab the reins and say, hey, can I bend the world a little bit on my own? Yes, let's make a deal. Let's talk about, and then let's cast some dice and see what happens. The XP piece is also saying, hey, there's a reward to be had here. You have actually done this, and it's never really felt this way to me with Dolmenwood, is when we go to a new hex, we get experience.
Yeah.
Because I want to reward exploration.
That's why I do it.
So, when we take on Western Reaches in the future, maybe that is a house rule we keep, is go to a new hex, get an experience point.
Yeah.
Whammy. But they're doing the same thing. And that hex XP was the second point I wanted to get to a moment ago. I hung on to it. I made it this far.
Look at you.
Look at me go. But the real answer that I was looking for was the reason we're talking about let's make a deal and empower characters, as you said, and then we ended up talking about XP, is the reward system. What's the structure in which I can give my players, hey, this is how you can dig in a mechanical way, because that's always the goofy part of RPGs, is we have our imaginary story we're just talking through, and then we have these funny shaped dice that's going to resolve things. And we have to bridge that gap. And those incentive structures to tell the player, hey, there's times when you can Kobayashi Maru this thing and set the terms of the test. And in both of these instances of where am I getting my XP, and is it all right if I jump off this pillar and try to lop off this Minotaur's head?
Yeah.
Can I define the world I'm in? And that's just good stuff.
Jody, I think that's a great place to kind of end our discussion. We're going to take a quick break for a sponsor, then we'll come back and we'll wrap this thing up. Fellow adventurer, have you ever wandered the forsaken dungeon beset on all sides by hungry beasts, murderous traps, and the existential dread of realizing you forgot to pack a pillow? Well, fear not, because for the low price of just a few mere measures of gold, you can acquire the one and only true companion for both your head and your heart. That's right, the Stingbat plushie. What's that? You've never heard of a Stingbat? Dear crawler, the gods truly smile upon you today. And that is why the Wandering Shop's next Coffer Quest crowdfunding project is the Stingbat plushie. It's completely venom-free, and thanks to the magic of Coffer Quest, you can secure yours right now for delivery at some point in the uncertain future. It's already been funded. A guy gave me a few coins behind a tavern just this morning, so you have nothing to worry about. Pledging now grants you access to an exclusive emblem pin that, again, will be delivered sometime in the future. So don't delay, because we certainly won't. Spread the word. Tell your party. Tell your rivals. Tell the adventurer next to you as they pry your body from a gelatinous cube. That's right. The Stingbat, the plushie one, shall be a reality. Coffer Quest crowdfunding is not a store. Delivery of materials is not guaranteed. Wandering Shop is not responsible for any sudden plushie awakenings or any unexplained midnight chittering. All right, Jody. Let us bring this topic into the light with a few core takeaways. I'm going to let you start, my friend. What is your first one?
My first one is to steal your line.
I know you're getting out ahead of me here.
I beat you to it. Transparency, as you often espouse and still the virtues of. Make sure if you're going to make deals with your players that the terms of the deal are clear. That much like in my example, I happen to fumble my way into a successful deal there of saying, hey, if you do this, you get advantage. If you fail, you get disadvantage. That's what we're going to go for. Do you want to take the deal or no deal? And off we went. Having your players go, yeah, I want to do that. And then setting the terms and they go, oh, that sucks. Is just not fun for anybody. So set the terms, give the offer, move on.
All right, so my first one is to reward the behavior you want to see. Say yes, even if it's a yes, but say yes to stuff that you want to see at your table, and empower your players to create alongside you, and making deals is a great way to do that.
Following hot on the heels of that is one, I'm going to double up here. It's okay to say no, because the deals you engage in making with your players, you get into that back and forth, you're setting the tone of your table. If you don't want to have back and forths with your players around mechanic issues, don't start making deals with them. If you want your world to be a world where you surf down shields downstairs and shoot your bow and ride on giant elephants' trunks and they only count as one, make those deals. If that's not appropriate, say, no, that's ridiculous. You can't ricochet the arrow around a 90-degree corner and stick the guy in the head down the hall. That's
what if I roll a natural 20?
And the answer is no. So, that's what I mean when I say not only is it encouraging the behavior you want to see, but also be clear that when you engage in this deal making, you are setting the terms for what your world and your table is like. So just a little caution.
Totally. My final one, Joni, is to be clear about whether or not this particular ruling or adjudication is going to be persistent through the rest of the game, or if this is a single moment. This is something that you said you were kind of worried about, and it's something that I think as long as you are transparent with your players about, like, hey, this single instance this is how it's going to work. It might not work like this in the future. I can't remember what I said, but I said those exact words. I can't remember the situation, that I said those exact words in, but I said them, in our last Sunday game, where I said, look, I might not rule this way in the future, but this is how we're ruling it now. And I think just being open with your players about whether or not this is how it's going to be, and this is now a capital T truth about how we're going to rule the world, or is this just how we're ruling it in the moment? And this ruling is going to drop out of my head, and if you reference it later, I'm going to say, what?
Exactly. This is a great one of, I'm gonna keep going on this for a minute. The combat ones in particular.
Oh, for sure.
If you want to have cool maneuvers, just be real careful with those cool maneuvers. But you know what? It is time to wrap it up. As the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in our discussion that you can take into a future game. If you have any questions or a unique experience from your table that you'd like to discuss with us in a future episode, head over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. This is going great. Look for links to materials we referenced in the episode thread or in the show notes there. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadow Dark Facebook page once in a while under the handle Pezman, and you can find Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, let's make a deal.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a podcast that is produced by the Stingbat Radio Network. It is a production of it as well. It's produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. You infected me. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production, is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.